So without any further ado, let me introduce Milin Fang, who is Vice Chair of the UN AI for Good Impact Steering Committee, co-founder of the People-Centered Internet, and a Renaissance woman that brings in everything that she does, all aspects of what we call a great woman. Milin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to emphasize that at the 75th anniversary, I, a Singapore woman who's lived 40 years in Silicon Valley, get the opportunity to introduce my hero, Alan Kay. Alan Turing set out a way to think about machine intelligence, but for the next 75 years, how are we going to think about it? No one has thought more profoundly about this than Alan Kay. He led the research groups that developed the first personal computer. And I am really glad to say that this change made it possible for millions, maybe billions, to come out of poverty. This is so profound. So it's not just the Turing Test, but it's what we did with it afterwards. The practical things he did included the invention of the human-computer interface, the graphical interface, which when Steve Jobs saw it, the rest was history, and it took it out. Object-oriented programming came from his laboratory at Xerox PARC. He has been distinguished by being the winner of the Turing Award, the prestigious Draper Prize, and it is my honor to invite Alan Kay to come to the stage to talk about the transformative potential for computing on human lives. Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
So first I have to explain that as an 85-year-old, I was quite happy to discover that I had left my laptop back in my flat. So I would like to very much thank my wife for going back and retrieving it. So it happened. I was actually rather hoping to prove I could still do this from memory, but okay, so reminding, because most of the people in this room will know different parts of what I'm going to say. So this is not a teaching session. And I'm very grateful to these people who gave material support to this talk. Particularly want to thank Gary Marcus for being willing to come over from New York to help, because it allowed, I think, a better focus for both of our talks are two sides of the same coin. And so I realize I'm taking my life in my hands here, but I want to concentrate on human beings. And this paper, by the way, I suggest that we do one here 2 years from now to celebrate the really great paper that Turing wrote around this time, which was his morphogenesis paper, and that is a seriously good piece of work. So here I took advantage of the opportunity that Dermot Turing was connected here to get his email address and to contact him asking about something I've always wondered. Because after reading this paper, my thought was, Turing must hate the theater. And I wonder if that's really true. So according to Dermot, who has written a few biographies of Turing and whose father was Turing's brother, Turing did hate the theater. He particularly did not like Shakespeare. This is directly from the source. And the reason is that here's Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream saying, "What fools these mortals be." And Shakespeare wrote that knowing it was going to be said from the stage of the Globe Theater, in which people were actually paying to be fooled. It's not just that we're easily fooled, Wendy, but we will pay to be fooled. And so this could be a magic show, it could be a political rally, it could be this forum, right? Because these are all performances. And if Shakespeare had known about Bacon, which he probably did, some people claim they're the same people. The whole point of nullius in verba is take nobody's word for it. And in theater, you're actually giving up a variety of things to get something special back. So we not only love the imitation game, it's a central part of human life, which is essentially bullshit. So let's go back to a cradle of AI back at MIT, and the famous Tech Square AI lab, which was on the 8th floor there. And all the ARPA contractors let graduate students partake of anything they were doing. And Minsky, I was visiting there. I was a grad student from another place, and Minsky said, well, we have 3 Army generals visiting us. Do you want to see what they have to say? And sure. So the scene was kind of like this. These guys were decorated. And the Army and ARPA were not in the same chain of command. So this was not a pressure on Minsky's funding. This was just a courtesy within the Department of Defense. And so the 4-star said, well, where are our robots and smart tanks? And Minsky knew better to tell them that, well, we're working on stacking children's blocks right now and maybe integrating a few equations there, neither one of which would. So he came up with, well, maybe in a few years we could have a robot dog. And the general next to him said, well, we already have millions of human robots. We draft and train ordinary, this is during the Vietnam War, we draft and train ordinary soldiers to do whatever we tell them. And General Mumble over here said, we don't need them, we need artificial superhuman intelligence. Because for many reasons, and I was out in the peanut gallery and not allowed to say anything. My first thought was, well, what about safety? And my second thought was, well, we already have one. And I'll pick this up in a minute. So the fourth idea here is about our misunderstandings about how the modern world has been working. So the idea when and this is an idea that that McLuhan used as a way of explaining what was really going on, that people thought the car was going to replace the horse and buggy, but what it did was to drag in something completely different. Houston, Texas, basically the automobile is a city buster. And I did some research and discovered that the number of deaths humanity is willing to put up with in order to have the automobile is 1.2 million a year, which is 3288 per day, which is 10 large plane crashes a day. And I also found out that it's the #1 cause of death of children age 1 to 19. And you might not have heard about that because the most interesting thing about these statistics is they're not even noticed. They've been normalized. This is a big part of what my talk is about, is these have been normalized to the point of invisibility. McLuhan's famous line was, "I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish." More is better is a human trait, but we've started to learn more is better until it isn't. And that's a thing that we have to really pay attention to. And Einstein blessed us with a couple of really good lines here. He said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same levels of thinking we use to create them." That is one of our biggest problems, is to always use what we have in order to fix things instead of upping our level. And he said, insanity is doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. So I give you those as two themes, but of course the levels of thinking is the big idea here. So actually I'm celebrating my 4th anniversary of having a stage 4 cancer today. And my doctor who kept me alive is right here. Thank you. And so I actually have a little bit of fondness for AIs because not just science, but some of the AI technology keeps me alive. Like I have to have a PET scan every 3 months. And with PET, what they do is to turn you into an X-ray machine. But the X-rays are higher frequency, more dangerous ones. You have to stay away from pregnant women and children while you go through this. The hospital has to have a cyclotron to make up the stuff. And it's a wonderful technology. And the great thing about having cancer and being a scientist is that it's really interesting. Every once in a while you realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm the experiment. But the rest of it is really interesting. And PET is truly remarkable because when a positron annihilates an electron, you get gamma rays going out at 180 degrees into these collectors here. And if you visualize, the speed of light goes about a foot in a nanosecond. And this thing is trying to find out where the annihilation actually happened. So it's not a simple correlation in time. It's a simple correlation between events that are interfering with it and events that are out of phase, and it's just incredible that it works at all. And so you wind up with something like this. This is the PET part of the thing, and this is a PET and an X-ray superposed. This guy is roughly this plane through here, and you can see that the bladder is very lit up. And that's not because there's cancer there. That's because your kidneys are excreting this radioactive stuff that you had, and your brain is lit up because it's a huge consumer of glucose. So you have to do a different scan. And then there's all this stuff going on here. So the resolution of these things is about 4 millimeters on a side, and they're volume elements. So that's about 1 million. Largest cells in our body that look like cells that you think of as cells are about our liver cells, and you can pack about 500,000 to 1 million liver cells into 4 cubic millimeters. And so they're looking for rather large things, and that is actually dangerously close to when cells start asking for a blood supply and you start growing a tumor if you're in stage 4. And here's a little guy here. I don't know what this is, and I'm not going to ask because they said my PET scan was okay, and that's all right with me. But imagine a radiologist having to look at many of these every day for an entire volume of a human body and to find something where you should ask the doctor to stick a long needle in there to do a biopsy to see if it's really something. So today's AI is really good at pattern matching and correlation, and that's pretty much all it's good for. But for this, it's a lifesaver because you don't need to have as much radioactive material. You can do a coarser scan, and it's been shown to be as good as what radiologists can do. And so it's part of an enormous number of things that today's AI technologies can do. It is the smaller part of what people are trying to do with AI. Gary will pick that up. So let's return to the Globe Theater here for a second, and let's extract a guy from the crowd and ask what is actually going on here. So the most important thing to realize is, as far as his sense organs are concerned, nothing is going on out there except fluctuations in light and fluctuations in air pressure. There's nothing out there. That's all our sense can do. So everything that he thinks is out there is something that he has manufactured. And that is one of the most important facts. And I know everybody knows this, but we don't remember it because the idea that it's out there is convenient. But this is actually what's going on. And Shakespeare knew this. This is from The Tempest. So Turing actually could have been helped if he liked Shakespeare, because Shakespeare knew what he was doing about fooling people, and he knew that we're actually in a walking hallucinatory dream. That is what we correct that dream by reference to the real world a little bit. But the dream we all have is different for each of us. So it's difficult for us to coordinate on. And every conversation we have, we're creating both ends of it, because we're just getting fluctuations in the air in. We have to turn that into the person. We have beliefs about the person. This is why witnesses in court cases are not very reliable, because we actually have to generate it. And theater partly works because parts of our brain ignore the fact that it's manifestly fake. And for this, I'll invoke a guy I use in every talk that I do, Daniel Kahneman, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, but especially his notion of expository fictions. Expository fictions are basically benign lies that you make up in order to explain something that is too complicated to explain. And so he came up with a really good one. He said, regardless of where they came from, let's take everything that gives us a fast response in our brain, no matter where it is in the brain and wherever it came about evolutionarily. And let's take everything that does slow thinking in our brain. Let's just have two categories. System 1 is the fast stuff. System 2 is the slow stuff. So here are both of them have noticed somebody is getting killed. And the fast guy is saying, this is really terrible. This is why theater works. Because the fast guy works even though the slow guy knows this is just a play. And this is very similar to knowing that an airplane is safe and still being afraid to fly. These are generated by two different parts of your mentarium. So a good example from the Globe Theater was the play Titus Andronicus, which was last staged there in 2014. Might not be staged again, or at least not the same way, because in that play, that is a slasher play. It turns out that the 16th century theater in general loved, as people do today, love revenge plays and bloody retribution plays and so forth. And this was Shakespeare's first tragedy, and it's not a very good play, and he didn't know exactly what to do, so he basically kills people through the play. So 14 people are killed in a bloody way. There are rapes, there are torture. And when it was last staged there in 2014, several hundreds of people during the run fainted even though they knew that they had paid money to get into the Globe Theater to see this thing. But their System 1 overruled, and generally does overrule System 2. So that's something to think about. Now here's something that people brought into their homes, thinking, well, it's just like we can have a movie theater in our home. But here in England, there's this guy by the name of Alf Garnett. There was a show called Till Death Us Do Part. And there was an American version of Alf, who is Archie Bunker. It's called All in the Family. In both countries, these were top shows, liked by everybody, and the producers actually intended them to be satire. But in looking closely, they found out that everybody loved this. Not just the people who realized it was satire, but in fact, the bigots in the country who saw Archie and Alf as their heroes, saying what they didn't think they should say in public. But in fact, this legitimized that kind of behavior in public. So another person who came into homes was this guy. And this is a reality show where you have quote unquote real people doing somewhat scripted things that usually push the boundary of reasonable behavior. And what nobody really thought of, except somebody like McLuhan, was, hey, this is renormalizing, because with the Industrial Revolution, you get an entire hidden environment when you think you're just taking one thing. That was McLuhan's insight, is it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. So you're not importing a little movie theater that you're going to watch a movie 2 hours a week. Nobody watches television 2 hours a week. It's an entire environment, 5 to 6 hours a day, and it brings in something that is going to change the way people think is normal in the world. So here's Eliza, the first chatbot. I think Gary will say more about it, but I knew Joe Weizenbaum, and one of the things Joe said, I had not realized that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. He was shocked, but he didn't know that our normal state is delusional. That was what I was showing you with, that's what Kahneman is trying to get us to understand. Our normal, we have to generate everything in our brain. So our beliefs constitute part of our delusions. So what if we attach this to the Industrial Revolution? We might have people using the world as a source for imaginary friends. Guess what's going on? So again, you have this Kahneman dilemma. One part of you knows it's just a program, and another part of you thinks it's a friend because it's doing friend-like things. So bringing in anthropology, which is slightly larger than social psychology, but these are just a few of the behavioral traits never found to be absent in a survey of about 2,000 cultures. So these are all always there. And if you include cognitive biases, you have many more than that. But some of them are very closely related to genetics. Fire, though, we don't have a gene for fire, but it's been preserved. It's in every culture. It's never absent. It's been preserved. And that has given rise to some really interesting notions about how you could actually come up with something like human language without too many genetic changes. It's been one of the problems. But in fact, people in Edinburgh have done some really good work on this. And another way of looking at it is if you just take these as things that humans must have, these are all human desires, and tie it to the Industrial Revolution. You have legal drugs, which is exactly what most marketing people really love. You don't have to learn to like them, you already do. The Industrial Revolution can create an oversupply. Evolution didn't build in any limits to us because we were a subsistence species for so long. More is better is one of the things that everybody believes, and here's stories, games, and vendettas, and so forth. So acculturation is a larger word for when you're in any culture, you start making your way to adapt to it. Coping is interesting because every culture is able to cope, but the notion of progress, as it's pronounced over here, is scarce to be found. It's not found in every culture, so it's not a human universal. And it became a topic of conversation maybe in the late Renaissance, but more properly in the Enlightenment. So this is a relatively different new idea that you might die in a world that was materially different than the one you were born into. That's something that we're not used to. And obedience is something that every society has to have as part of social cohesion. So here's a famous experiment that many of you will know about. The importance of this experiment is not just the simple explanation of it, but the importance of it was done with thousands of people. It's been done many dozens of times by different experimenters, and it has taken many different pathways. So it's a very interesting experiment in social science. And if you do things the way Milgram set things up, you're basically guaranteed that 66%, men or women, even while the person you're administering the shocks to is screaming, and even after the person who's an actor, who seems to have fallen unconscious. Many of these people experience there are ethical boundaries that I think were transgressed by Milgram here. He put the people administrating the shocks through a lot of stress, because he would say the experiment requires that you continue, when they would complain. And they would shock all the way to 450 volts, they thought. And a smaller number were more like concentration camp guards, where they would even force the person's hand onto the shocking plate when told to do so. So Milgram's simple, and I urge you to read the book and understand this better, because this is too much of an expository fiction. This is a really interesting set of things. But Milgram said that if a system of death camps were set up in the U.S. of the sort we had seen in Nazi Germany, one would find sufficient personnel for those camps in any medium-sized American town. And I think he's likely to be right. But that's an unhappy subject. Let's go to fads, which are much more fun. So in the 50s in the US, everything had to be chlorophyll. Those of you who are roughly my age will remember it. And today, we would have not chlorets, but AIRETs. And we'd have the smartest breath in town instead of the freshest breath. Or maybe it's Computer's Real AI mayonnaise, the smarter spread. It's in our very name. My wife Bonnie supplied this. It's spreading everywhere. And I couple this with, because it's a spread, I couple this with one of my favorite things, which was to turn an AI, correlative AI, loose on the internet, looking for correlations within 99% or better over 10 years. So here's a really good one. 99.25 divorce rate in Maine correlates with the per capita consumption. I hope you can see what's actually going on here. That these AIs are basically curve fitters. And this thing is looking for two curves of a similar shape. And it has the entire internet to draw from. And yet, if we look at, so 5-year-old children will tell you this can't be true, but if they look at it a little bit longer, and I've tested this out on people, they'll start trying to figure out what could be the, this is how conspiracy theories get born. This is so correlative. I mean, the Pentagon would go to war, literally, with this kind of thing. And of course, can't we think about this better? And so I'll tell you, my vote for something that's still relevant today, not after 75 years, but 405 years, is Francis Bacon's Nova Morgana. Because, and I'll give you an entire summary of this book in Brooklynese, because I think it comes out better that way. We were all really stupos, is the summary of this book. We just can't get out of our own way. And Bacon goes through and says, yeah, we got bad brains, bad genetics and cultures, bad individual learning, bad language use, bad, everything is really dumb. And he pointed out we can invent ways to act that are much smarter than we are. And where we are right now is the result, because Bacon was the main inspiration for the Royal Society. And the Royal Society added something really important. It wasn't just about sharing knowledge. It was about vetting knowledge, having people who were not the inventors of theories to do the vetting. And so this was my thought when the general said we need a superhuman artificial intelligence. It's, well, we got it. It's science. Science is a built thing. It's artificial. It's knows more than any scientist. It's smarter than any scientist and stuff. We've already got it. Nobody could say this to these generals because they don't like science. But too bad. So we've already got it. And a question here for the following panels of stuff is, are we actually doing what the Royal Society was set up for today? Are we actually dealing with this in a strict enough way, with enough evidence? Most of the companies that are successful in selling AI today cannot tell you how the results are actually obtained. That worries me. Even if they were doing a good thing, they don't know. And then the other thing from that Minsky meeting was, what about safety? And I think the main theme of the 21st century should be safety. Forget about the rest of this stuff. There are so many things that have gotten really dangerous lately. But here's one that you may remember from last year. CrowdStrike is a package that was on millions of Microsoft systems to protect against hackers. And an update, and the wonderful irony here in the land of ironies is that CrowdStrike is there to protect against attacks from the outside, but they forgot to protect against inadvertent bugs from the inside. And what happened was 2,000 hospitals and emergency rooms in America, so these are millions of computers, but hospital systems used these computers that used Microsoft and CrowdStrike, and several hundred hospitals and emergency rooms here. And you can look in the lower right, and you can see how could this be allowed to have happened for so long? And the answer was that CrowdStrike had no theory or operation or anything except personally reinstalling by hand the software system in every one of these millions of computers. That should be unthinkable. So I, of course, wrote Butler Lamson, who's actually a fellow of the Royal Society. If ever a computer scientist deserved to be in it, it's Butler. And Butler, among many other things, was one of the world's leading experts in secure systems and stuff. And the basic principle of secure systems is start with the genies in the bottles and never let them out. It's very hard to bolt on security afterwards. I wrote Butler, though, because he and I were comrades at Xerox PARC. And so I said, Butler, shouldn't companies affecting lives should be required by law to show high levels of security and that they can recover critical functions quickly? And Butler said it's not clear how you would make such a rule. And when Butler said it's not clear, that's when you start worrying. And then at the bottom he says, I'm glad I don't have to make these decisions. But honestly, I wish Butler were making these decisions. They would be much better than much is going on. And just quickly here, another example here. What I'm trying to do is to show that we are in deep trouble before we get to AI, right? I hope everybody's getting that. So here's another one. The autopilot was originally blamed, but then they found out that Boeing management was trying to compete with Airbus, and they rushed a very, very bad redesign of a 737 plane that was moved the center of gravity on it so it was no longer stable in flight without continuous correction. They fixed the autopilot to try and handle this and made some mistakes. But after the first plane loader was killed, they only issued manuals about how to fly the plane better. And they wound up killing another whole plane flight. So this is, to engineers, this is really ugly. This is like, engineers have something like the Hippocratic Oath, which is the bridge must not collapse, the plane must not crash, the software must not. And this was a complete violation of that. But as in medicine, the Hippocratic Oath isn't enough. Medicine is supported by a lot of civil law about how to run things and certification. Almost none of this actually exists. And so here's a line to remember. It's the combination of artificial non-intelligence, these systems are not intelligent, and human weaknesses that make the difference for the worst. And I'll just skip past this. So, Paleolithic guy with a Paleolithic weapon. He's clever, so he can invent a spear. He's even really clever. He invents the worst weapon ever invented, which is bureaucracy. And bureaucracy invented the Tomahawk missile. The Tomahawk missile can have a W-80 warhead, which is a dial-a-city hydrogen bomb that weighs about 240 pounds. It goes from a half of Hiroshima to 15 Hiroshimas. And there are 2,000 of these, and we have them. But still, the more dangerous weapon is this one. Now the Pentagon is using today's AIs. This was something that Gary, I hope, will respond to. Using today's AIs doing war games. And, you know, if you define victory as demolishing the enemy, it may explain why all of the different today's AIs in the Pentagon have advocated first strikes in their war games. Because if you don't have the additional idea in there that we should survive too, why not? And here's the ghost of General Snafu. He's worrying about billions of ordinary human-level intelligence on the internet. But It's really trillions, because he's already got billions of human-level intelligence. Humans are all over the internet. And so I say it's the power, scaling, reach, access, and blindness of humans that will count. And here's my scary scenario. It's one thing to make a hydrogen bomb that you can dial a city with, but what a disaffected mind can do with the resource, and this is actually not using things like ChatGPT because they're big enough to have the government force censorship on them. But what you can actually get in free software and run on your own laptop is something that we could think about as a black swan event. Okay. So here's a funny cartoon. And that was before, Tony Hoare pointed out, well, debugging is harder than programming, so don't use all your cleverness to write the program, but programmers do. And here's the funny part of the cartoon, except this guy has got it completely wrong. He misses what McLuhan is all about. What it's really going to be is no debugging, because everybody can now write prompts. And the possibility that anybody will debug these larger groups of code that may have many hidden problems with them is close to zero. So, end with a question here. How much help is too much help? And I thought it'd be fun to build a little generator. Instead of doing conclusions and recommendations, let's just make a simple ELIZA for generating questions that I think everybody needs to ask at this forum. So how much how much help is too much help? How much fooling is too much fooling? How much scaling is too much scaling? How much hubris is too much hubris? Plug in any of those human universals and ask, don't we need to rethink where we actually are? This is the Einstein idea. I don't think the thinking patterns that have gotten us to this point are going to work. Okay. And please do not take my word for it.